In this demonstration, I'm going to show how to use an async task in an Android application. We're going to use it to try and guess a number on a background thread while leaving the main thread up and running. So here I've got the skeleton of the application that we're going to build. We've got a button to start off the process to try and guess the number. I'm going to display some status as we go, and we're going to display the final answer that we get. Now at the moment, I'll click this. I've just put in some testing stuff here to show that the UI is wired up right. Let's have a look at the code. So here I've got my activity that's set up in my UI. I've got a couple things. This button is set to call an onClick function, so onClick start task. I've got two text boxes. The first one is named text status, and the second one is named text final answer. So this is all the UI I'm going to need. Let's go look at the code that I've got so far. Well, we create the application as usual with an onCreate, nothing special there. I then create my function that the button is going to call back. So here, all we're doing is we're going to call these other two functions that I've written, and we're just testing them out in the onCreate. So we display progress with the just testing. So display progress finds a view by ID using the r.id.textStatus. And then to that view, which is a text view, I'm going to set the message that I was passed in. So I'm just displaying some text in a text box. Likewise, display answer is nearly identical, except it takes in an integer or a number. It concatenates it with a string to generate a message, and then we display that message to the text final answer text box. So every time I click the button, at the moment it just simply calls these two. Let's do something more interesting. Let's try and guess a number. So first I'm going to come up with a number that I'm going to want to guess. So let's pick a number here. I'm going to make it a constant. So we're going to say this is going to be a private static final, and let's make it a long, and password is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Incidentally, this is also the code to the air shield if you're interested. So now that I've got the actual thing to guess, let's write some code that's going to try and guess it here. So I'm going to set up a loop that's trying to guess a number. So let's come up with long, let's call it guess equals 0, while the guess does not equal to my password. I'm going to keep guessing. Now, in order to make a guess, I need a random object, so let's call it random. And guess equals rand dot next long. And it's going to give me a long value. Now, of course, this is going to give me all possible long values. There's many, many, many of them. I need to somehow restrict that. So let's come up with a way to restrict that. So let's get final static. We don't need static here, pardon me. We just need it to be long, and let's call it range. And let's set it up. We got a 5-digit number there, so let's make it any number between 0 and 100,000. That'll cover us. This is just the range of values I'm willing to tolerate, and then I'm going to do some other things here just to make my number come back right. So we're going to do math.absolute. It's going to force me to get a positive value from this, so it'll throw away all the negatives. I'm going to mod it by the range, so now we get a value between 0 and the range minus 1. Okay, so with that in mind, I now have a way of actually coming up and computing a value. When I'm done, I can display the answer of guess. The only way out of here is to come up with the right guess. And let's put the progress. How do I want to do on the progress? Well, at the moment, let's say done. Now let's see what happens. So Control F11 compiles, and it starts to run on the Android. And there we go, it found the password. Fantastic. I try it again, and it's running in the background here, and it finished there. So that's great. Now let's try something else. Let's imagine that I had a much larger range to work with. So I just added an extra 0 here, so it's going to be 10 times the range. It should take 10 times as long to try and guess the password. So I'll Control F11 to restart it. And I'll guess the password. And it's running as fast as it can in the background. Now one interesting thing is happening here. My UI is not doing anything. It's simply waiting. In fact, if I had something that was showing on my UI, if I had other buttons I could click, I wouldn't be able to interact with them. And I want to show one last thing here. If I create this even longer, and let's just make sure that we can show when we're not done, I'll put a message at the front that says working. This is going to do something interesting for us. It's going to run for a very long time in the background. We're going to first try and set this thing to working, and then compute. But you'll note that the status didn't change. This working never popped up. What happens is that only once this function, my button handler, once that finishes, does the UI get a chance to update. So at the moment, we're currently locking up the UI thread, doing all of our calculation. And of course, that's not what we'd like to do. At the moment, my application is stuck. If I had other buttons, I couldn't click them. My compute, basically, it's all locked up, trying to do everything it can. And here we say it's not responding. It's going to force close. So a force close, we got to do something better than this. We might think, well, let's come up with some progress. So let's try and figure out a way of tracking some progress. So let's do a long count equals 0. We're going to count up. Every time we have a new guess, I'm going to increment count. And then if count mod, let's call it the publish rate, equals 0, then I'm going to display something. And let's have it display checked guess number and count. So I'm going to try it in the middle here, trying to get it to generate all these things for me. So I'll create the publish rate, bring it down into here, and it's going to be a long publish rate, and let's make it publish every 1,000 guesses. Every 1,000 guesses, we should be dumping something to the screen now. Just to highlight the point, when I run this, it's still not going to give me any of that feedback because the UI thread's going to be locked. Right, that's the problem with doing any major computation on the UI thread. The complete UI locks up until you've done that. So nothing's going on here. It's going to have to think for so long. It's going to just Android's going to say, wait, I'm not getting anything. It's locked up the UI. It's going to close it, force close. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to use an async task. So we're going to push all of this computation onto a background thread. So let's go down here and we're going to create this background thread. So this is going to be a private class that's inside of my existing class. And let's call it password guesser task. And it's going to have to extend the async task, which takes a number of generics. I'll fill those in just a second. And I'll put in the rest of the curly braces. Now, as it turns out, async task requires 3 generics. And I just happen to have it written down here. So the generics we're going to have to be working with are, first, I'm going to pass it in a long. This long is the type of reference, i.e. the variables, the object types, being passed into something called doInBackground. This is a function that we're going to be writing here. There's 2 more. One I'm going to make a string, and the next one I'm going to make an integer. Pardon me, I think I need that to be a long. Make that back a long. So this is going to be the reference type returned. The final one is reference type returned by this thing called doInBackground. This is kind of sounding like what we want. We want to do something in the background. And I'll have to make that to extends. So how do I get this to do something in the background? Well, first I'll import, and now it's going to give me an error saying I haven't implemented some functions. So I'm going to add Unimplemented Methods, let Eclipse do the work for me. And it gave me this doInBackground. Now, as it turns out, this long here happens to be from this third parameter, this generic. That's how it knew what to return. This long for the arguments was the first parameter here. We see that here it's the type of reference passed into doBackground. So the first and the third are what's coming in and out of this doInBackground. If we mouse over it, it'll tell us what's going on. We can override this method to perform computation on the background thread. Fantastic, that's exactly what we want. So let's pull in some of our code here. I'm going to leave those constants up top just to to show what we can do with them. And let's pull all of this in. Why not? So into this do in background, I'm going to come up with some guesses. I'm going to randomly come up with the guesses. We're going to check for the publish rate. And when it's a publish rate, I'm going to call display progress. And then we're done. Now, these range and publish rate, these are values that I knew. I'll just bring it back onto the screen here. I knew it in the button click. They happen to be local here. Now, I could make them a field for the class. I could put them way at the top and then they could be accessible everywhere. But I want to show how you can pass information in. So let's just leave them there for the moment. Now, in order for me to actually come up with one of these, I've got to instantiate it. This is a class, so I need to instantiate one. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to create an object, and let's call this Cracker. Cracker task is equal to new. I don't have a constructor for that. That's fine. I don't need a constructor. What I need to now do is call the Cracker task.execute. And you'll see here that it's going to want to pass in some longs. And the ... means that we can pass in a var arg, or a unbounded number of these longs. So I can pass in a sequence of them. So I can pass in up to 2 longs. Well, I just happen to have the publish rate and the range. So let's pass in the range and the publish rate as my 2 arguments into this do background. So these 2 values are going to come up into this thing called args. Well, arg0, that's not a very descriptive. Let's call it arguments. Now I got to extract those somehow. So let's well, I'll put it here in a comment. Extract arguments. So I'm going to create a long, and let's call this range equals arguments sub 0, and then a long and publish rate equals arguments sub 1. How did I know what those were coming in as? Well, the first argument, I'm going to call range, was the first thing I passed in up here, the range. The second argument down here, arguments sub 1 in an array, is going to come in here as publish rates, the second argument I pass in. So now I got those 2. I'm going to change my constants here to use the local values instead of the constants that were undefined here. Publish and control space complete. Okay, so now I'm passing it in here. I'm executing it. Thinking, okay, that should be good. Let's check for other things that we've got going on that maybe we need to fix. Looks like all the errors are cleaned up. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a comment here, class comment, and let's call this the background task to crack the password. And you'll note that password is still accessible because it was a field inside of my outer class. So the inner class can access all of the fields of the outer class. Let's try this and see what happens. So I'll go Control F11, and the app is going to restart. Guess the password, and uh-oh, it crashed. Well, let's check out why. Well, I happen to have logcat here up on the screen. You may need to switch to the debug perspective or the DDMS in order for that to come up. But I've got the logcat. I'll maximize it so we can begin to see what's going on. Expanding a few of these, we see that the Android runtime had an exception. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Android got it wrong. They have somehow messed things up and that's crashed my application. Anytime your app crashes, it's almost 100% chance you did something wrong. So let's see what we did. So we've got here the runtime exception. An error occurred while executing do in background. Okay, so that's our code. Now we look for a place that we wrote. So did we write java.util.Concurrent? No, absolutely not. So we keep going down. Java.lang.thread? No, we didn't write that either. Android.view? No, we didn't write android.view. Android.widget? No. ca.demo.asyncTask. Yep, that's my code. So we see here that we had a problem in line 32. So let me go back over here. Line 32. It said, no, this line of code had a problem. Well, that line looks alright. Let's see what's going on with it. So that line had a problem. We can see carrying on. Do in background, we just have the call stack coming up from it, and the concurrent. So see, well, what happened? Well, if we look back up, we see here there's this caused line. Caused by, such and such exception caused by, and we've got here called from wrong thread exception. The comment, only the original thread that created a view hierarchy can touch its view. Okay, so we have two threads in the play. We're trying to call this function called display progress here, from the background thread. So let me add a comment. Run on background thread. So I need to somehow get this status out from the background thread. Anytime you've got multiple threads, this is going to be a challenge. So it happens to be that the asyncTask class provides us a way of getting that back onto the main thread. It's very, very handy. So what I want to do is I want to do what's called publish the progress. So every time I want to actually change the value and explain or produce something for the UI to see, I'm going to call publish progress. And I can pass in here, we see it wants a set of strings. Now why strings? Well, in fact, we told it here. As our second argument for these generics and the generics, I said string. And this is the type of reference passed to onProgressUpdate. And that's the function that's going to end up being called. So I can pass in some strings. I can say anything I like. Hello world, for example. Well, that's not particularly useful. Let's actually make it be this string here. And in fact, let's clean this up. Let's make it pass in two things. So let's put guess number in the count, and then let's put in the last guess. So we can actually see what it is we're guessing. And it'll make it look a little bit more exciting. So publish progress is going to, if we look at the description, it's going to trigger a callback to the onProgressUpdate. Now I could go through and type it out. The easiest way to do that is, let me just give myself some extra room here on my screen, is I can go inside the class, right click, and then go down to source, which is Alt-Shift-S. I'll do that here just so everyone can see it. Alt-Shift-S. And I'm going to override or implement methods. And I can pick what to override or implement. So in the task, async task, these are the things that are possible for me to override. And I want this onProgressUpdate. And it's going to pass us strings because we said we wanted strings. So the two things coming in, we'll let it call a super just so that it's a well-behaved citizen. And then what I want to do is I'm going to concatenate my strings together. Now I just so happen to have two strings coming in, I know that. I can just put them all together. So let's do message, string message equals nothing for string in values. I'm going to concatenate message equals message plus, and let's put in a comma just for fun. So I'll build the message, and then I can actually now call the display progress with my message. So what is this? Remember, this is calling back to my function here on my UI that's going to change my UI. I need to be this on the main thread. I'll put a comment here, executed on main UI thread. So that's the whole purpose of this onProgressUpdate function, is it allows us to do something on the main thread. Now again, this, we don't want to actually put these calls in here. I'm going to comment them out, otherwise it's going to crash it, because these are also calling into the main thread. So let's save this, Control F11 to run it, and let's see what happens. Now every 1,000 updates, we should trigger a call to this onProgressUpdate, and that should then generate a string that we want to display. And there we can see it, as we are kind of the Hollywood style cracking. Every 1,000 updates, we publish the information as to how many we've tried and what the last guess was. Now as it turns out, we've got quite a range of guesses that are possible, so this is probably going to take a while. I'll just leave it for the moment. I'm going to go back up here and set the maximum range. I'm going to drop it back down to something a little more meaningful. Oops. So drop it down to 100,000, which gives us plenty of room for our 5-digit number, and it should be much, much faster to crack. Now what else is there? Let me get rid of some of this comment here. Well, we wanted to be able to not only display the progress, which we've got going on quite nicely here. That's fantastic. We wanted to be able to display the answer. So I could call a publish progress or something like that, but it turns out there's another way we can do this. So when you're finished, the async task is going to call back to the on post execute. Post execute meaning after. So we have the do in background. We call the publish progress, which comes into here, and we're going to want to come up and have this on post execute. So Alt Shift S again, and I'm going to override and implement methods, and the on post execute. Now it's bringing in a long as a argument. This argument is a long because, well, we said we wanted one to be a long. It's the type returned by do in background. This also happens to be the value passed to onPostExecute, as my comment says. So this value is what we returned up here. Well, at the moment we're returning a null. That's not so good. Let's actually return a value. Let's return, for example, the guess, which we happen to know is the password. So now we've got the password coming in here. So I can call my function I wrote way earlier, way at the top here, display answer. I'll copy and paste that. I'm going to display the answer, and the answer wants a long, so we're going to pass in a result. I'm relying on Java to do auto unboxing for the primitive data or the wrapper classes for long. Okay. So now when it's done, it should end up calling this and displaying my answer. Let's go back over here. Oh, we see this is still going. I'm going to click back to cancel that. Note that the async task is tied to the life of the activity it's found in. So when you close the activity, the async task is also closed. So let's guess the password. Here we have our updates. And then when we're finished that, it called back and it gave us the value. So this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 came out of this return value from my do in background, which was then passed in here to my display answer. So that's kind of cool. We now have a way of seeing what's going on intermittently. Anytime we want, we can call publish progress from the background thread. That kicks us back onto the main UI thread and allows us to do something on the main UI thread, passing us those values. We can then, when we're done, use the onPostExecute. Okay, so that's pretty good. That's most of what we wanted to show here today. Now, sometimes you'll be doing something in the background. In this case, we see here it's computing quickly, but it might go for quite a while. I happen to have something neat that I can show, but in some cases you won't have that. Maybe you're downloading content from the web, maybe you're doing something else that you don't have the same sort of ability to show the results. So what I could do is I can show up here a little icon saying that we're currently processing. So let's up the range just so it calculates a bit longer, 10 times as long. And now I'm going to go through and generate this icon. It turns out that that's built into the Android's framework, and I've got to do 3 things. First, I've got to tell the activity that I want to be able to show this little icon. Next, I've got to say when to show it, and then third, when to hide it. So first, we have to tell it we want it. So here at the top in my onCreate, before setContentView, I'm going to tell the activity to show this, or be able to show the indeterminate progress indication. So I'm going to request a window feature. Request window feature, and then I provided an ID. So under the window class, window dot, and here's all the features. Feature, oops, and I want the feature called indeterminate progress. Indeterminate progress, flags for indeterminate progress. Great, so now I can tell it I want to show that. I have to actually do so. Well, where am I going to do that? Well, let's, for the moment, I could put it in here, for example, the start task. And then it would turn that on, and I could turn it off at some other point in time. But what I'd really love to do is I'd love to put everything inside the task. So I'd really like to have my task start it and stop that icon. Well, how can I do that? Well, I happen to have here on post, so I know when I'm done. Okay, so that's easy. I can cancel it. So MainActivity, I need to reference my MainActivity, the object I've got, this dot set progress indeterminate visibility. Very nice long name here. Progress bar indeterminate visibility. I'm going to set that to false. I'm done, so I don't want to show it anymore. You can guess I need to call set indeterminate visibility and set it to true, but where can I do that? For the moment, let's just do that up here in my button click. It's not the best place, but at least it'll work. So now, when I click the button, it turns this icon on, and then when I'm finished, way down at the bottom, it turns it off. Again, I'm on the UI thread. I'll put this here, executed on main UI thread. So we're good to do that. Let's go back here, run the application, and see what happens. And we can see up here in the top right hand corner, the little spinning icon. That's exactly what we just put in there. So Android is handling that for us. It's doing the animation, and we simply told it we want it to start, and then when we're finished calculating, we'll see here in just a moment hopefully, it'll actually turn off. There we go. It's gone. I'll click it again and we can see it comes back. So it's coming back, turned on when we click, off when we are finished. Now what we'd really like to do is just have this async background task, password guesser, have it handle the whole thing. It knows when we start, it knows when we end. We should use that. Now I can't put it here inside this do in background. Why? Well, this is on the background thread. I can't interact with the UI from the background thread. I could put it in the onProgress update, but maybe I don't want to call onProgress update very soon at the start. Maybe I'm only calling it after a while. So I want to do something before. So let's see if there's something I can do. Alt-Shift-S, pardon me, S. I'm going to override and implement methods. Let's see what we've got. Well, on pre-execute sounds like us. Pre-execute meaning before. So I'm going to implement this, and now I can put some code. Now this, I'm putting a comment here, executed on main UI thread, and I can move any code I like. So let's do this. Cut that, paste it into here. So now, when the background task is going to start executing, it's first going to call on pre-execute on the UI thread, which is going to set the progress bar to be visible. I'm then going to run in the background. As we run in the background, it's going to call into the update, the onProgress updates. And when it's finished, it calls into the post execute. So Control F11, let's see that actually in progress. So now we're going to bundle it. We're going to encapsulate all of this sort of progress notion inside the one task. It frees up the rest of my UI from having to track the states of when is the icon visible, when is it animated. That's all handled from inside the task. And so when it finishes, it's going to finish this icon. And there we go, it finished and it removed it from the display. So that's all I wanted to show. We've seen how to create a task in the background. We've seen how to run things before and after the task finishes, and we've seen that it needs to be on the UI thread. We also saw how to get progress updates from my background task whenever I wanted to generate them, and that was again on the UI thread. We saw the difference between the two. If you look in the comments below this video on YouTube, you'll see some of the code that was used in this making.